Right, started recording now, everyone.
Okay. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the Special Planning Committee. And thank you all for your attendance this morning. The first item on our agenda is apologies for absence.
I haven't had any, Chair.
None? Okay. Item 2, any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests? No, I do have to declare an interest in item 4 and item 8. Governor of Kevin Engoy School on item 4, and item 8, I'm chair of the Gower AOB steering group, partnership steering group. Thank you. Right, item 3, any items for deferral or withdrawal?
No, Chair.
Okay, then we move on to item 4, is the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And the first item you'll find on page 3 is at Kevin Engoy School. And that is Simon?
Yep, okay, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, please.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'll start. This proposal relates to land at Kevin Hengoyd Leisure Centre in Bonamine. This is a council application for upgrades to an existing facility at the existing leisure centre located to the rear of Kevin Hengoyd Community School. In terms of updates, there is effectively one update to the report and conditions in order to reference potential land contamination issues and how these will be addressed by conditions. So I'll have to read through the updated section of the report. So there's an updated report section and informatives to include reference to policy RP6, which relates to land contamination. There's a deletion to the last sentence of the land stability section, which relates to ground gas. And the following section, which I'll read to you now, is to be added to the report. So in terms of land contamination, due to past activities in and around the site, there's a potential for land contamination within the site. In order to address this issue, the application has been accompanied by a geoenvironmental and geotechnical assessment prepared by Earth Science Partnership. The assessment highlights the potential requirement for remediation measures in order to address historic land contamination, including the potential for ground gas protection measures. A remediation strategy has been provided based on the limited site investigations undertaken to date. However, further site investigation work will be required in order to inform the final remediation options appraisal and remediation strategy. Having regard to the information provided within the geoenvironmental and geotechnical assessment, and having regard to the requirements within LDP policy RP6, its recommended conditions are imposed to address the residual risks arising from land contamination at the site, should planning permission be granted. In relation to the risks to controlled waters, NRW have raised no concerns in relation to this matter. The geoenvironmental and geotechnical assessment considers the risks to controlled waters from the development of the site is likely to be low and considers no further assessment is warranted. This conclusion is accepted. So there's also two conditions to add in relation to the land contamination issue. That's to provide further site investigations, and the details of those reports can then inform remediation measures, which are also subject to conditions. Okay, so that's the update. In terms of the application itself, as you can see, the site location plan is before you, which identifies the sort of key areas. So the proposal comprises with 5 key elements. You've got the new covered sports pitch, which is 11 metres high, 61 metres long and 41 metres wide. And that's identified on the site location plan as a white rectangle there on the right-hand side. There's an associated new car park, which will provide 69 parking spaces with some electric charging points, 2 coach spaces and 18 cycle stands. So the parking area there is on the left-hand side, identified in brown. There's also an extension and refurbishment of existing buildings to provide a reception area and improved gym and changing room facilities. And that's just to the south of the proposed sports barn. There's a limited area which is proposed to be upgraded. There's a new vehicle access off Kevin Hengoyd Road, which is at the top of the red line area, which provides access to the new car park. There's also an existing tennis court which is proposed to be resurfaced and upgraded, and that's towards the bottom right-hand side of the page. It's a grey rectangle identified within the application site. In terms of public responses to the application, there's been 3 letters of objection which have been received in relation to parking, flooding and highway safety concerns, and these have been addressed within the report. There's been 149 letters of support and 2 letters of comment have also been received to the application. Okay, and if you want to go to the next slide now, which shows effectively the current situation on site and also identifies where the new elements are proposed to be incorporated into the scheme. So, say for the new pedestrian connection, the site's located entirely within the existing grounds of Kevin Hengoy Community School and associated leisure centre. The existing leisure centre building comprises of various blocks at different levels that are currently a barrier to less able users. Vehicle access to the leisure centre is currently shared with the school off Caldecott Road, which is the main school entrance, which is on the western side of the site. The leisure centre entrance is currently not prominent or legible. Under these new proposals, a dedicated entrance will be provided on the eastern part of the site, adjacent to the new car park, and served by associated new vehicular and pedestrian accesses off Kevin Hengoy Road, and these will be entirely separate from the new school access. So the proposals will separate out the accesses that are currently shared. Okay, if you want to put the next slide on, Ian, which is the sort of more close-up site location plan. Extensions to the existing buildings will provide a reception and cafe area for visitors. The existing buildings in this area will be reclad and modernised to be more consistent with the modern elevation treatments of the adjacent school buildings, which have fairly recently been refurbished. It's considered the proposal to upgrade the existing facilities and provide enhanced playing facilities would be of benefit to the school and the wider community. In terms of planning policy, policy RC2 of the LDP, which relates to retail and leisure development, broadly requires new leisure facilities to be located within city centre, district centre or local centres in the interest of sustainability and to protect the retail and leisure hierarchy within Swansea. The development's located entirely within the urban area, and while a significant new leisure facility is proposed in an out-of-centre location, it would essentially enhance the existing leisure facilities and would be co-located with the school to provide mutual benefits for both. Moreover, the proposed access improvements would improve active travel links with the existing community. So in planning policy terms, it's considered the proposal would not conflict with policy RC2, and officers consider the principle of development is acceptable. Ian, if you could go to the next slide, which has a photo from Kevin Hengoy Road showing the area for the proposed buildings. Visually, the proposed sports barn, while significant in scale, will be set down below Kevin Hengoy Road level and will be read as part of the cluster of buildings associated with the existing school and leisure centre. A significant amount of new trees and hedge planting is proposed that would enhance the visual quality and ecological value in what is currently a relatively barren area. Ian, if you could go through to the next slide. So that's the existing gym area that's proposed to be upgraded on the left-hand side, and the changing rooms are on the right-hand side. If you could go to the next slide, Ian. So that's the new proposals for the upgrade of the existing facility. There's a small extension there, which is in a triangular shape on the northern side of the page there. So that will provide a new access point, a new entrance for the leisure centre. That will open up into a reception room and a number of smaller gym studio areas to be used together with an upgrade with the existing gym facilities. Okay, if you go to the next slide, Ian. So that's an elevation drawing showing the new entrance. As you can see, it's proposed to be clad in a blue material and a sort of grey material which will match with the new cladding that's been put on the existing buildings, so that there'll be a bit of continuity there with the proposed between the existing and proposed buildings at the school. Okay, and if you could go on to the next slide. So that shows the sports barn. As you can see, it's quite a significant new structure with a semicircular roof. It's proposed to be clad in a UPVC membrane, which is typical of these type of larger sports barn facilities. Okay, if you could go to the next slide, Ian. And that's a visual representation of what the proposed sports barn would look like. Okay, on the basis of the information that we've received to date and having regard to the design of proposals, it's not considered the proposal would result in any significant visual impacts, and the upgrades to existing buildings and landscaping would actually provide a benefit to the site and the surroundings. If you could just go back to the site location plan, Ian. In terms of residential amenity, the nearest residential properties are some 50 metres away to the east and some 70 metres away to the west. The site location plan there broadly shows the residential areas in relation to the application site. Details of lighting have been provided for the car park and resurfaced multi-use pitch area, which indicate that light spill from these areas would not be significant. As such, there would be no direct physical impact upon these properties. In terms of opening hours, the proposal, the upgraded premises would be open between Mondays and Fridays between 6:30 a.m. and 10:30 p.m, Saturdays 7 a.m. till 9 p.m, and Sundays 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. In terms of access and highway safety, the application has been accompanied by a transport statement. The local highway authority considers the proposed new parking provision for the site is acceptable, and the traffic movements associated with the development could be accommodated on the existing network without any significant impacts. Conditions are recommended to secure the cycle parking and electric charging points, and to ensure the active travel improvement works are provided in a timely manner prior to occupation. In terms of ecology, the application has been accompanied by an ecological survey. The site was found to have little ecological interest, and there is Japanese knotweed on the site. Conditions are recommended in relation to the treatment of the knotweed and in relation to the provision of a construction environment management plan and landscape environment management plan. Further details of landscaping will also be required by condition to ensure satisfactory ecological enhancements. In terms of other matters, the site is within a development high-risk area for former coal mine workings. The Coal Authority have been consulted on the application, and the application has been accompanied by a technical report in relation to these matters. The Coal Authority considers the residual risks from the former coal mine workings can be addressed by a condition, and those conditions are included within the report. In terms of drainage, because of the scale of the proposal, surface water will be dealt with through a SAB consent application. Broadly, an attenuation pond is proposed with swales in order to deal with the surface water discharge from the site. In terms of foul water, Welsh Water have not are happy with the proposals and have recommended no objection. That concludes the presentation. Is there any questions?
Because somebody moved it.
So Evan,
Yeah.
I'm waiting for Councillor Evans indicated she wanted to speak, but I can't see her on the list.
She's not present,
No?
Chair. No.
Okay, well if I can see your hand up there, Des. I mean, as one of the ward members, then obviously we welcome this scheme. There's a long history of the site, and considering a remarkable turnaround, considering that in 2012, that the leisure centre itself future was not looking so good. But for us, we welcome the biggest investment in the east side since Swansea.com stadium was built, the Liberty Stadium as we all know it. And it will mean that all sports can be carried out on site now, indoors, regardless of the weather. And that means that there's every day in use. It'll mean greater provision for the school itself, for its sport and activities, and its connections with rugby and football teams in the area, and also for the wider community. That means benefits for health and well-being, which I'm sure we all welcome. So obviously the scheme is fantastic and means a lot to Swansea East Side. But residents have raised a few concerns, residents on Kevin Road in particular. I often get called up there when there's bad weather that we've been having lately, where water drains down. You can see the slope if you saw the map there, from Kevin Hengoed Road onto Kevin Road, and then as floods the roads, some of the houses across the road at that junction, and the council itself has had to be there and put bigger curbs in to prevent that happening. And then we see then that the water's got nowhere to go because there's no drains on the road for about another 150 yards outside, across the road from number 144, and even that drain is not in the road, it's offset. So I can see the issues there, and I sympathise with people. The other issue is parking. Currently, for example, the rugby club, when it has an overflow, and it is a successful rugby club, so a lot of people come from visiting teams as well in their cars and coaches, and they use what is the current car park of the school, where this building will be, as an overflow car park. So I think we need to consider what we can put in place to stop then people parking down Kevin Road, which does happen still now, and that is unfair to the residents there. So hopefully we can get some answers to that, even if we have to sit down and meet and see what we can do there. Also, I mean, and we're all for this, of course, but when there's a plateau to be built for people to cross the road from one pavement, which is only on one side, to the other side, then people are going to lose their parking spaces there. So perhaps when we come back after some, I look to see Des with his hand up there, Councillor Thomas, that we could hopefully get some resolution for that.
Okay, yeah, sure, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I concur with everything you've said. It's an exciting development, you know, particularly for your part of the city, and hopefully some of the current problems that residents are dealing with can be addressed because of it, such as the drainage. You know, this is the opportunity to solve those problems, isn't it, as part of the development goes on. No, it looks great, looks brilliant, everything positive, and not even a square metre of render to be seen. Fantastic.
What about the cladding? Right. No, you're right, and it can only be great for the community, for Swansea as well. Anyone else wish to speak? Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting project. The officer did bring up one thing about coal mining in the area. I'm just asking, our officers, our planning officers, assured that this will be okay, because I've seen them. I've got mining things in my area, and we woke up one morning and there's a big hole in the road. So I'm just asking for reassurance from our officers that they've got no problems with it.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, and there have been extensive investigations on site, which has really held this application up. But you are right, and we do need assurance on that. I can't see anyone else put their hand up here. No. A couple of issues there then. Starting on a low formative. Okay, see him. Present highway issues.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start taking those one at a time. The first issue was the existing drainage issues on Kevin Road. Now, I mean, that's it is an existing problem. I'm aware that there are very there's very little in the ground in terms of drainage infrastructure up there. The application would require a SAD application to cater for the on-site drainage, and there are schemes to put in active travel links, footways, etc., to plumb the site into pedestrian provision in the local area. Now, obviously, drainage will be considered as part of the detailed design of those. And whilst I'm not saying that drainage will be installed as part of the detailed design, the drainage of the area will be considered when it comes to things like designing plateaus, to make sure that water can bypass the plateau, to make sure that the curbs are at sufficient height so it doesn't cause any additional risk to properties and that kind of thing.
Okay. So that if necessary, then we can have another. Well, when the design is there, that we can make sure it fits.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the other query was around Rugby Club overflow parking. I'm not entirely sure how to address this. Obviously, the car park is suitable for the leisure centre use. It's more than adequate, and it's on the place of the existing car park. So essentially, the car park will still be there, albeit some of it will be used for the new facilities. I don't know whether we will have the opportunity to ask them to produce a car park management plan or something like that, so we can see how they're proposing to manage the car park.
Yeah, okay.
might be a suggestion. And also, there's quite a good travel plans come in with it, so we can look at the way people are using the leisure centre. We can look at how they're getting to the leisure centre. I mean, a lot of their clients are from the local area, and you'd think you would certainly hope that with improvements to walking and cycling infrastructure, that more people will take advantage of that and not use their cars. There are targets set within the travel plan, and within the travel plan we would have the ability to draw down on additional resource should those targets not be being met.
Right, okay. It's just that understandably residents want some assurance there, and I go along with their concerns. Can't see any other hands up. Simon, did you want to comment on anything there?
The coal mining, I think.
Oh, no, on the mining, yeah.
Yeah, there was a question from Councillor Anderson about the coal mining issues at the site. As I said in the presentation, the application has been accompanied by a sort of preliminary assessment, shall we say, to look at the coal mining risks at the site. The statutory consultee on that, the Coal Authority, have reviewed that assessment and have recommended further conditions. So those have been imposed or will be imposed if planning permission is granted. So those are conditions 3 and 4, recommended conditions. So those effectively require a scheme to be undertaken of further site investigations, which will then inform the final remediation measures in order to address any identified risks. So they will submit that report to the council. We will then forward that to the Coal Authority, who will then say whether the remediation measures are satisfactory or not. So yeah, it's will be comprehensively dealt with, and it's secured by conditions of the permission.
Thanks. I don't know, I think it was last Easter, maybe the Easter before, there was quite a bit of activity there on drilling to make sure that
there'll be further drilling works there which need to be undertaken in terms of the land contamination and the risk from former coal mining. So it's all been, there's preliminary assessments been undertaken, and it be dealt with by conditions.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that both. I can't see any other hands up then, and no? Okay, well, being the case then, you can see the recommendation on page 32 is one of approval, and we'll now take a vote on that recommendation.
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
4.
Peter Black.
4.
Bill Downing.
4.
Will Evans.
4.
Mary Jones.
4.
Mike Lewis.
4.
Richard Lewis.
4.
Des Thomas.
4.
Mike White.
4.
And Paul Light.
And 4, thank you.
That's 10 for unanimous.
Yeah, that was a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. And then,
Oh, apologies, Councillor Linda Taylor Lloyd is also present.
Oh,
Sorry, Councillor Taylor Lloyd.
okay. Sorry I was late, but I couldn't get into the computer. Yeah, 4.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Doctor. Okay, then we move on to item 5 then, you'll see that on page 38, is the Plan and Performance Report 2019, 2020, 20 and to 21. It's yours, Ian, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Members recall, and I'm sure in past years, we've presented a report on our annual performance. Requirement to prepare a report stems from the Welsh Government agenda to modernise the planning system in 2015. It represents an important tool for benchmarking the performance of authorities across Wales and also allows Welsh Government to assess performance, and where authorities are underperforming, they would consider sort of intervention in those local authorities. Last year, Welsh Government advised us that because of the pandemic, they weren't expected, or there was no requirement to produce the annual performance report, and the intention was to provide 2 years of reports this year. Again, this year they have advised there's no requirement to submit a report, although if authorities were submitting a report, they are prepared to prepare a report, they would welcome submission. So we have prepared a report to cover the last 2 years. It's slightly different to previous reports because in the past, Welsh Government have provided data which has allowed us to compare our performance against other authorities. So this year we don't have that comparison data. So the report highlights how we've performed over the last 2 years. There is some reference to figures from the last report in 18-19 to give members an indication of how we're performing compared to the position then, but obviously the All Wales position could be different now than it was 2 years ago. So in summary, 2019-20, most of the year was unaffected by coronavirus. The authorities' performance levels were high, generally at an equivalent or slightly higher level than they were in 18-19. Obviously, since March 2020, the pandemic took hold. It's had an impact on the way we work. Officers have been based at home rather than the office, and certainly in the early days of the pandemic, we had to look at how we operated with things like site visits, and obviously committee was cancelled for a couple of months because we were putting in place new procedures to deal with the planning system. But in my view, for 2021, we've continued to perform generally at a high level. The one area where there's a noticeable drop in performance is enforcement, and that is directly attributable to the pandemic. Undertaking site visits has been harder, being unable to access properties and get on land to assess developments. That is getting easier, and we are working to deal with that, but it has created a backlog. There have also been vacancies in the enforcement team. Various enforcement officers have left the authority. We've now filled those posts, but again, it's contributed to a backlog, so we'll be prioritising that backlog and trying to reduce it over the next year or so. But obviously the report is there. It sets out how we performed, and if members have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Okay, thank you. I can see, Councillor David Hopkins is Deputy Leader. I see your hand up. Do you want to speak, please? Then Councillor White. Yeah.
Sorry, I ended the talk this morning, but I thought really right and proper that we thank the officers for their extremely very difficult time. Not only the officers, the committee, it's only right and proper that obviously planning is in the report. And the work that you've carried out to do this pandemic is really appreciated. It's just a big thank you to the officers, members of the committee for all.
Okay. Thank you, David. Councillor Hopkins, we've lost you. Anyway, Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ian touched on the backlog. Have you got any idea at what type of figure we looked at, Ian, and how long are the sort of oldest cases that we got?
Okay, get you that now. Other hands up. Okay.
No, that hasn't.
We're probably looking in the region of about 600 complaints at the moment that are under investigation, that are still being investigated.
Okay.
And yeah, what is the sort of the oldest period that they've gone on for? Are you able to know that information, Ian?
I don't have it at hand, I'm afraid, Councillor. Some, as members will be aware with enforcement, that there will be cases where we've taken enforcement action. We're on appeals. I can think of an appeal at the moment. We're awaiting a decision where we served a notice about 3 years ago. So there will be some which are 2, 3, maybe longer. Doesn't mean nothing's happening. It means that we're going through the process, and the process can take time. We have time periods for compliance on notices, which we could still be in. We have to go to prosecution. We are taking cases back to court now, but there was a delay in prosecutions again because of the pandemic. So I can find out certainly more details for you, Councillor, and either send it to you or advise committee in the future, or whichever is easiest for you, really.
Yes, I'm happy if you want to bring it back to the committee, at least we know then exactly what that you know, the time scale, if that's the right, Chair.
Of course, yeah. Okay, next is Councillor Linda Tyler-Lloyd.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Councillor White, because only this week I've had 2 people complaining about enforcement not being taking place, and I'm having to explain all the time that it's because of the COVID restrictions. So I think that is the only sort of hiccup. Sorry about that. That's the only hiccup that I would say. Okay, thank you. I can see you shaking your head, Des. Yeah, it's the enforcement that's the problem, I think.
Can't you hear what you're saying, Linda?
Oh, sorry. Could you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, this is what I'm saying. I agree with Councillor Mike White, because it's the enforcement. I mean, 2 people this week have complained about delays with enforcement and people, council not going out, and I've had to explain again that it's because of COVID. So I think that is the hiccup in the system because of COVID. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Somebody's muted. I think Peter Black is muted us.
All right.
Are members getting feedback from us?
I haven't muted anybody.
No, it was earlier when Councillor Hopkins was speaking.
Yeah, that was dreadful. Couldn't hear what David said.
Yeah, I think it was a bad connection because somebody's muting us, and obviously the chair's speaking and you can't hear him. So
Gareth, I'll put my hand up to that. When there was feedback, but when I muted you, Linda was starting to come through nice and clear. So the feedback is coming from your office, and sadly, that's why we didn't hear David Hopkins.
no, that Councillor Hopkins, it was just a bad signal.
Definitely, because he was what they call him in and out. Anyway, Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, members of the public are obviously quite anxious when they report an infringe or what they seem to think is an infringement. They are quite anxious to know the process and what's happening. So it is important we get feedback as quickly as possible. The other thing I was going to mention is it possible to notify local members that complaints have been made about development in their area? I mean, I've had the experience lately of reporting an issue only for it to be told, come back and said, oh, we've already dealt with it, made the visit and come to an agreement, so on and so on. And the information, I've had to dig the information out rather than for it to be provided. Is that, I don't want to overburden the department any more than it is, but it shouldn't be too difficult to keep local members notified.
Yeah. Certainly, Councillor, that's something we can look at. We used to do it in the past, so it's just a matter of generating a weekly report and sending it round. So that's certainly something I can look at.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've got no other hands up.
No, Chair. No, just to say, we do recognise the pressures on enforcement.
Yeah.
Obviously, when people apply for planning permission, they're keen to help. They put photographs in of their site to help with the application process. When it's enforcement, you're dealing with someone who hasn't contacted the council, so it's harder to get on site. And we're obviously mindful of restrictions with COVID, but it is something we will be targeting over the next 12 months to try and reduce. From next week, Monday, we'll have a full complement of enforcement officers again, so that hopefully will help the situation as well.
Sound excellent. Okay, members, we can see the report in front of us, and more for information. I think that it is what a quality report and really good news. So we move on then, members, to item 6. You see that on page 60 there is the adoption of the Swansea LDP Monitoring Report 2020-21. That's over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen now, which I hope is okay for everyone.
Yes.
Good to go. Okay, well, I hope that my report follows on nicely from Ian's in regard to the annual review, because this is all about setting out the findings of the ongoing monitoring that we do of the LDP, which has been ongoing since adoption of the plan in February 2019. I mean, in a few months' time, it'll be 3 years since we approved members approved the LDP. So it's absolutely flying by the time. But this report is covering the financial year 20 to 21. So sections 1 and 2 set out the background and the context of this AMR. It explains how it's a statutory part of the process. It's mandatory. It's something that we do, and a very important part of the process actually, because these are these LDPs. They're not plans that just you produce. They sit on a shelf and gather dust. They're very much live plans, strategies that we need to keep on top of, keep monitoring to see whether they're being effectively implemented and the delivery of sites are on course. So this is, as I say, the second AMR. Members will recall I presented on the first one about this time last year, similar to the performance report Ian's gone through. Last year we weren't required to submit the document to Welsh Government or even to produce the AMR, but we did it anyway in Swansea because, as I say, we consider it the really important part of the process. So we had that first year to base the second year monitoring on. The indicators themselves, there are 115 of them. There's a lot there. It requires an awful lot of work and statistical analysis to go through that, and monitoring of all the sort of decisions that we're making in applications. So it's a very comprehensive review of what we are doing on a day-to-day, week basis. So as you can see there, the purpose really is to quantify how the objectives of the LDP are being achieved, how its strategy, its key policies, the allocations, and the infrastructure requirements, all of those are being delivered, but also to identify what have been the challenges, what are the current challenges, and the contextual changes within which we're operating as a planning service, really. And there have obviously been some ones to contend with. It's section 4 of the report really that focuses on the main findings. Overall, fundamentally, there is no cause for plan review at this stage. The strategy, the policies of the plan, they're being implemented effectively, and the monitoring is showing that good progress is being made, bringing forward development in accordance with all the principles that we've written into the document. It does highlight in the report, section 4, that there's been significant national policy changes that we operate under. But I must say that we've been ahead of the curve on that, really, in Swansea. We've had publication of the National Development Plan for Wales, and we've had the new Placemaking Charter released. We've had a new planning policy Wales, and a lot of this has been focused on the placemaking agenda. And as I say, we're the vanguard of that in Swansea, as you'll know, when we've been pushing that agenda. So it's almost a case of national policy catching up with what we've been doing for a while on that. So the plan message really is that the plan was already, had baked in all of this this agenda anyway. So we don't have any concerns at all about being overtaken by events in terms of the national framework. We're well ahead of the game in those terms. But the wider societal change, of course, is the pandemic, and it has had a significant impact. Section 4.7 of the report highlights some of the issues in that regard. We've, in consultation with the stakeholders like the Home Builders Federation, that's been an important part of the process to highlight to us, what have been the issues faced by developers, and where is there sort of shared understanding then between public and private sector on what we need to do to assist the sector to deal with those challenges. As I say, every indicator has been reviewed, and you'll see on the table there that I've put on the slide. Most of them are green, which suggests that the policies are being implemented effectively. No cause for any particular enhanced research or enhanced monitoring of those. They'll continue to be checked in the normal way. We'll review all the decisions being made, applications, and so on. There are some highlighted yellow. That indicates areas where we do need to focus in on in terms of our ongoing research and delving a bit deeper into what's happening, and they're really based around the housing delivery issues. Those are, as set out in the report, the main thing we're seeing is the impact of the pandemic. There was months of shutdown on site, and just the sheer availability of people to work on site, but also to work on preparatory, the mass disruption caused by it has had effect on the preparatory work that goes into the planning process. And the other aspect that's flagged up in the report is about the longer lead-in times to sites. We've certainly seen that, and there's been some of it related to the pandemic, some of it is to the complexity of those sites and the amount of work that's gone into the pre-planning stages and to dealing with the applications themselves. As they are, the nature of our plan is that so much is put into these key strategic sites, and it requires an awful lot of collaborative work, cross-departmental work, and working with the site promoters to get these right. But I'd return really to the overall message being that we're broadly on course. The indicators are being met, and we have a strategy. We know what we need to do in terms of where some of those indicators are showing yellow. We know we need to focus on getting out of the pandemic and working with developers, which we do. We got a good track record of working in through forums and through on individual applications to enable stuff to come forward in the way we wanted to. And we know we're very fortunate in Swansea. We know we've got an excellent range of sites. We've got really exciting opportunities and allocated sites that are coming forward through the process. We don't have any dead ducks really, like, you know, let's say we're so lucky in that respect in terms of lots of interest, developers wanting to bring sites forward, and not every part of Wales has that. So it's just going to take that bit more time in terms of the early stages before we get, you know, through the trajectory of delivery, where we get to seeing some of these on site. So finally, I'll just return to the recommendations that are set out in the report, and it's to note the findings, the AMR, and for the document to be submitted as required to Welsh Government. And there's a standard recommendation there in terms of any final sort of edits in terms of typographical, grammatical, and so on. We'll do those before we publish on the website and make all our stakeholders aware of the plan and its review. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Tom. I got 2 speakers up already. Councillor Downing first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the indicators, if I can refer to 4.21, where it mentions key journey times. What I'm asking for is, where do I find the monitoring indicator for journey times? And if not, can I have it sent to me? Because like Tom, I suppose we've both had quite a lot of correspondence with regarding journey times. So that's just one. The second, my second part is, I asked a question at the LDP adoption meeting, whether on a strategic site, whether they will be developed in their entirety, or can developers cherry pick these sites? And I was told no, they will be developed in their entirety. The question I want to ask, and I know it's been said that there is no cause for a planning review. So maybe asking Tom this: what effect would TAN 15 coming in on the 1st of December have on any of the strategic sites? Obviously, I'm referring to Bonded Lights because I think in the new plan, it does affect the strategic site.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we'll get answers for that in a moment. Councillor White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Tom, yeah, it's page 86. Very encouraging to see that, you know, the dialogue's gone on with the house builders, and as you said, the houses that we've got to, under our LDP, that we got to provide, and also the point of developers must ensure homes are built to a suitable size, because, as you know, with some sites, the houses are actually like shoe boxes, aren't they? But when the sites come forward, all this part of the plan is provided to those developers. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No other hands up there. Did you want to go first on Luke time?
Yeah, sorry, just to come in, there's reference to TAN 15 from Councillor Downing. I am looking to organise a short training session with members before 1st of December, so that they're fully aware of the changes and potential implications on the TAN. But that'll be separate, obviously, from this report, but just so members will be aware.
Okay, thank you. No other hands up to speak, I can't see. Tom, you just wanted to say that Councillor Downing raised as well.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Okay, first point was in relation to the journey time. So I can, yeah, as Councillor Downing said, there has been some correspondence exchanged on that, and I'm happy to provide some of the detail directly to Councillor Downing. But in terms of the the direct answer is it's number 98 is the relevant indicator. So that's something that can be referenced, but I'm happy to deal with any sort of direct questions in relation to how it applies to Pontypridd Lice. That's not a problem at all. In terms of the question about how sites are brought forward, fundamentally what's required when applications come forward on allocated sites and on strategic allocations is that if it's a sub-part of an area that's allocated, then it must not do anything to compromise the delivery of the wider site. So often that will mean that a site promoter is in control of or owns the entire allocation, which was the case, for example, in Garden Village, which is probably the last one that came before members in terms of a strategic site. There are other sites where parts of the allocation may not be under the control of a site promoter, and they may not be able to get control of it. But if they are going to bring forward an application on an element of it, then we need to be satisfied as a planning authority, as a council, that in doing so, the rest of the site is, as I say, is not compromised or adversely affected. And of course, we've got to consider the updated circumstances, the new evidence that applies. Things change over time, and Town 15 is a good example of that. The new policy and the new details and data in terms of areas subject to potential flood risk in Swansea. I think it's useful that Ian's highlighted that there's going to be a specific session highlighting the issues there, but fundamentally we're talking about more significant areas of Swansea being affected by this potential flood risk because it builds in the implications of climate change. So that's on the cards. That is coming into play from the 1st of December, and that goes to your third point, Councillor Downing, in terms of what effect is that going to have on sites coming forward. Well, it's a great example of something that we are going to need to factor into our monitoring for next year once it does come into play from 1st of December onwards. There'll be a period of analysis required to understand, is it affecting key sites? To what extent? Is it? Are they minor effects or are they significant? At a high level, at this stage, I say that some of the information is only just being released. And it's in advance of it formally coming into play on the 1st of December. But it looks like a lot of the allocations and non-strategic sites, or I say a lot, most of them are not affected significantly by it. Some of the strategic sites are more affected than they were, but it is only some, and those, as I say, those will need to be assessed individually to see whether or not it significantly compromises the ability for sites to come forward or not. So it's an important one for the next stage of the plan review. So, and I think Councillor White's was, I'm happy to be corrected, but I think it was the same query in terms of how sites come forward, how they're promoted by developers. Is it, Councillor, that can they come forward on parts of a site? Is it the same query or something slightly different?
And also the suitability of the house size.
Suitability of the house size, yes. So that will actually, it's a really good point and a key issue that's going to come through on the next item actually on the agenda about the new placemaking guidance for residential development. So there's a key addition to the guidance or an amendment to the guidance in respect of the standards that we'll use. So we will definitely pick that up in the next item.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Councillor Downing, you wanted to come back with something?
Yeah, only to thank Tom for his response to the questions, yes, I'll accept his email about the indicator.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any other hands up. That's an old hand there, Councillor Downing. Yeah.
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 I'm trying to get it down now.
That's a speak. Okay, thank you very much, and Tom, thank you very much for your presentation. And there are, you see on page 60 there are 3 recommendations, which we take the vote on that.
Yeah. So, Councillor Anderson.
4.
Peter Black.
4.
Phil Downing.
4.
Will Evans.
4.
Mary Jones.
4.
Mike Lewis.
4.
Richard Lewis. Councillor Richard Lewis.
4.
Councillor Lewis, can you say that again? Sorry, Richard Lewis.
He's a long way away.
Come back. Okay, Councillor Des Thomas.
4.
Councillor Linda Taylor Lloyd.
4.
Councillor Mike White.
4.
Councillor Paul Lloyd.
Yeah, 4.
And Councillor Richard Lewis, are you there, Richard? No. Okay.
Anyway, that's
He's on mute, Chair. Richard Lewis is on mute.
Oh,
yeah, we can see that, Councillor Evans, but he's got to unmute himself. Okay, wrong topic.
Carried.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all. And then we move on to item 7 there, page 79, is the adoption of the SPG. I'm just trying to find it now. Supplemental planning guidance for residential development, for infill and backland development, and placemaking and guidance for household development. That's Steve Smith.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see that presentation on their screens.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, good.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, there's a relatively short presentation here. Obviously, this is a presentation of the extensive report in your agenda pack with the numerous appendices. So the first thing, just to highlight that all SPGs, obviously there's a number of SPGs on this agenda today, all SPGs supplement the policies of the local development plan. That's their purpose. They expand on specific topics, types of development. They explain how the LDP policies will be implemented for those specific aspects. And the other key thing to note, all SPG is guidance. So it's always applied flexibly. It's not a set of specific rules. It's not new policy. It provides that supplementary expanding role. So this presentation focuses on the 3 residential design guides on the screen at the moment there, which relate to residential development at different scales, which I'll go on to the next slide to explain a bit more. And the key thing to note is they're not new SPGs. These documents, yes, they've been updated, yes, they've been reformatted, but they've been around since 2014 and have been used successfully to negotiate and assess many schemes, which is, especially the larger developments, have come through the process of approval by planning committee. So we're using this at the moment, and these are the updates to the documents. And part of the reasons why they needed to be updated is because, as Tom outlined in his presentation, the changes and the greater emphasis on placemaking at the national level. So it's updated and refined guidance. So the first document, very quick recap, because back in February when we presented the report for the permission to consult, we were done a much detailed description of what's in the documents. But just very briefly, in terms of the 3 guides, they look at residential at all scales. the sort of this document on the screen now looks at residential developments, typically for what we call major developments, which is 10 homes up to many hundreds. In the case of some of our strategic sites, many thousands of homes. And the key thing about this guide is it looks at placemaking, residential placemaking in a structured approach, starting with the larger scale aspects such as neighborhoods, works through to key aspects of site planning, such as connecting things together, where the open spaces are, the street design, then gets down to some specific issues at plot level, and finally gets down to specific issues of detail on the building. The infill and backland development guide is typically up to 10 homes. So the majority of projects developed of this nature will usually go through the delegated decision-making process. These won't automatically come to planning applications like the previous document schemes designed to that major development standard. So this is typically for vacant land in existing communities. It might be gaps between existing homes. It might be a redevelopment of a small commercial building in an existing village or neighborhood, or it might be opening up backlands to the rear. So it's got a very close link to those existing communities, and this makes up a sort of significant amount of the housing delivery in Swansea, these smaller scale developments. And then finally, these householder developments will pretty much all be processed through the delegated route. I very much doubt any householder applications would come before planning committee these days, but there's a significant amount of applications of this nature going through the planning process. It's all about guiding residents on the extensions and alterations to their existing homes. There's an increasing emphasis on some of these home makeovers, so it's not just an extension, it's a whole house upgrade, and it also deals with aspects such as decking and all the other things, the improvements that people may make to their homes. And it's also about ensuring not only there's this guidance there for the householders, there's also measures in force to help protect the amenity of neighbours. So that's the broad overview of what the free documents that do, the updated documents. So the next few slides outline the consultation undertaken. So firstly, to point out the consultation was undertaken over the summer into the early autumn, which the minimum time SPG should be consulted on is 6 weeks. You can see we were well in excess of that with a 13-week consultation window. Information was placed on the council website. The draft documents were available bilingually to download. Notification emails were sent to a whole range of actors and interest in terms of developers, agents, the designers, community councils, public sector bodies, natural resources, Wales, etc., etc. It was promoted locally via council social media. We produced a 10-page non-technical summary, so that's taking the 100-page document down to 10 very clear pages to help communities understand what's in the guide. We were able to set up some online webinars with developers, which include a question and answer session. That's one of the extracts on the screen there from the presentation that was recorded and placed on the internet for people to review afterwards if they couldn't attend. We were also, with the lifting of COVID restrictions, sort of towards the late summer, we were able to actually get out and about and talk to some families and children about the future places or the places they would like to live in. And in total, we had 13 separate responses from organisations and agents and interests, and they break down to some 90 odd separate comments. So the key thing to note is this is all outlined in the appendices of the report, and this presentation is providing that summary. So just to emphasize the engagement with children and families, because whilst we talk a lot to the development industry that deliver these homes, or the interests that have specific aspects to look at for these new developments, we also need to talk to the young people that might grow up in these developments and the young people that may then become the adults that live their lives in these developments. And it's really important we actually understand it from how people are going to live in these places. So we were able to join the council's Summer of Play events. So there were pre-existing events, and they very kindly let us join in to the sessions at Trallwyn and Gorseinham Parks, where we set up a kind of activity station. And we were able to we had two activities. One was designing your house of the future, which you can see some of the fantastic houses the kids made there at the bottom. So they got involved in crafting, and in doing that, we could see some of their ideas for bigger windows, more colourful homes, and we were talking with the kids while they were doing it. And in the meantime, we were also able to talk to the parents and carers with them there to actually start to understand how they feel about some of the new developments and what could be happening. We also had a vote, which was like a sticker vote where children could vote for their favourite street, house or park, which gave us some very clear messages. So the messages that came out of that engagement from children and families is that there was a very strong message that these children and families would like to be able to walk to school, walk to the shops, walk to the park and have nature nearby, nature on their doorstep. And that seems simple, but we've got to remember there's certain developments in the past that have forced people into cars. And we know that the national agenda now, which comes down to the local agenda in Swansea, is the emphasis on active travel, so walking, cycling and sustainable travel modes. And the whole idea now, which is embraced in the residential design guide, of a walkable neighbourhood. So we know the design guide is spot on for what families and children and young people are flagging there. We also had a clear message that new streets should be green and not full of cars, and trees were specifically mentioned. And once again, we know from national agendas we're seeking to reduce that dominance of cars. Yes, they've still got to be there, but we know we will have greener, slower speed streets. So again, what we're hearing from the public is exactly what the design guidance is seeking to achieve. And finally, in terms of new homes, they should have larger windows, which is for indoor-outdoor connection, natural lighting, seeing the environment and all those sorts of things, and be colourful. So once again, the design guidance pushes towards that, and this is, came exactly from those people who will be living their lives in these places. So in terms of talking to the development industry, let's call it that, and the interest to engage in these new places, all the detail is set out in appendices A, B, and C. And what I'm going to run through now is the broad comments that kind of relate to all three documents. If you want to specifically see which comments relate to the major residential design guide, the Infill design guide, or the householder guide, it's all there in the appendices. But I've put it all together now for brevity. So the comments on the screen are some of sort of the overarching sort of comments that or some of the comments that maybe didn't have multiple comments, but they are relevant. And then the latter slides are where there was sort of like stronger areas of comment from the industry. So the key thing to firstly note is there was broad support for the placemaking guidance. As we heard from Tom, there's now a very strong national agenda around placemaking. There was also a July 2020 Welsh Government publication called Building Better Places, and that re-emphasised, as we come out of the COVID pandemic, the importance of placemaking. So it's not watering down, it's making sure we keep this placemaking agenda exactly where it should be. We've all learned about the sort of the good bits and the bad bits of our neighbourhoods, and it's making sure new neighbourhoods learn from that. So nobody's saying it shouldn't be an agenda placemaking, but there's specific comments about aspects of the guidance that we've been able to understand, and in some instances change the guidance. There were general comments about the flexibility of the guidance, and as I said at the beginning of the presentation, all SPG is guidance. So by its very nature, it can be applied flexibly. It is not a set of rules that have to be applied literally, and that's for the decision maker to put the weight on the guide and how it relates to the place. So no change to the document, just a restatement that it's flexible. There was helpful comments around making sure we strengthen the guidance on tree retention, which links to one of the other SPGs on this report, on this agenda today. So we had a cross link there, and one of the key things we're emphasising is the tree replacement standard, which is the requirement for all category A and B trees. If they're removed, there's a ratio for new tree planting. So it's not just one for one, there's a specific criteria for the amount of canopy cover, so make sure everybody knows what's expected for retaining trees. There was comments that the guidance was too focused on suburban developments, which we have taken the opportunity to add in more clarity for mixed use buildings. As we know, we will be seeking to repopulate town and city centres, use of that some of that vacant space on upper floors above commercial buildings and shops and the like. So we have been able to kind of address that issue. Helpfully, a few respondents pointed out that homes are going to start to look different. We know that from the integration of low carbon technologies, photovoltaic panels, maybe larger windows for solar gain, different use of materials. So that's very much something the guidance can embrace. We're not saying what homes should look like, but we are saying they should be well designed. And also we were asked to clarify the section on accessible homes. So again, just reminding everyone, the whole SPG is guidance, and access to buildings is specifically controlled via the building regulations. But the guidance just helpfully kind of provides some pointers if you want to make more accessible homes, how you can go about doing that. So in terms of the aspects of the guidance that received some of the main comments, so i.e. from multiple interest in the development industry, and you can see who said what in those appendices I've referred to earlier. One of the main comments we had was regarding space standards, and I think one of the councillors, I think it's Councillor White, flagged this earlier, and Tom said that we would come back to that, and here it is on this slide. So the guidance sets out space, or a link to space standards that new developments are expected to achieve in terms of space inside the homes. And the development industry concern was that this would affect density, it would affect viability, reduce costs and reduce affordability. So whilst we hear those concerns, as planners advising planning committee, we consider these space standards are important, both for the health and well-being of the occupants and, in the wider sense, for the cohesiveness of those communities. Yes, homes need to be affordable, but if they're too small, they are going to have implications for those people's well-being living inside them. And if they're not going to stay in the houses, they might move on, and you haven't got a settled community. So it's important to understand it from both sides. And so the standards have stayed in the document, but what we have done is move the standards, and the two standards we are now referring to is the nationally described space standards, which was prepared by Westminster Government, and the Welsh design quality design quality requirements, which primarily are relating to affordable houses, but may be rolled out to private houses nationally in future. So they are now in an appendix, and there's text in the document to indicate they will be in consideration, and it's for developers to explain how they have or haven't addressed those. So we've given a bit more of a mechanism for developers to explain what they're doing and why, but there's still something very important, and it's stayed in the guide. There were comments from multiple interests around the street design process. We know that developers are embracing the concept of green streets, of slow streets, safe streets, place-led streets, which comes down from national guidance. But we know that developers are finding some challenges of taking these kind of more interesting streets through the adoption process with the council. So we are working on that. So separate to this design guidance we're talking about to you today, highway officers working on a street design guide, which placemaking and planning officers are also inputting into, and the development industry is inputting to via the developers forum. So there's no change to the guide in this instance, but it's very much about continuing that collaborative working. So we know where we're heading, and we're just making sure we're joining up all the parts of the council function. In terms of viability and delivery, this was flagged. Some developers see placemaking, green infrastructure, sustainable urban drainage as costs to their projects. These cannot be removed as agendas. We know they're important nationally and locally, and we know they make great places. And it's very much just about flagging that if there are what's considered to be additional costs in some instances, maybe the land prices are too high and they need to come down in terms of what landowner expectations, but it can all be looked at in a transparent manner via the development viability model. So again, no change to the document, but just recognizing that there might be implications on viability and how it can be discussed. There were comments around density, which was probably one of the broadest range of comments. From some people felt the density in the guidance was too high, some felt it was too low, and some felt it needs to be more flexible, bearing in mind it is flexible anyway. So in terms of suburban densities of 35 dwellings per hectare, we know that works. A number of really important schemes have come before planning committees, such as Gwynvine, which was maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. That was spot on 35 dwellings per hectare, the Housing Association joint venture project, which is on site now. So we know 35 dwellings per hectare works. That proves it's deliverable on the basis that developers provide a mix of homes. You can't achieve 35 dwellings per hectare with all 5-bedroom, 4-bedroom houses. You need a mix right from 1-bed flats right through to the larger houses. But we have improved the guidance and the clarity for higher density town and city centre locations, which relates to the Future Wales guidance on seeking to achieve densities of 50 dwellings per hectare in accessible town and city centre locations. And we've got fantastic examples of these high density, really great projects in Swansea, such as on the screen there, which is the urban quarter development on Swansea High Street, which is higher density flats. above active frontage street level shops there. So I think this is the second to last slide. We also had comments around some of the specified percentage targets of certain aspects in the guidance. So typically there's in the placemaking guidance for residential development, there's a requirement for 20% of homes to be uplifted, to have the designs improved on key frontages. And there's also a requirement on projects of 100 or more houses, I think, to have 25% of gardens large enough to allow for extensions and garden rooms and the like. So we know these are important considerations, because certainly in terms of the uplifted frontages, we don't want a whole place looking the same, where it doesn't have any quality around the key open spaces and every house looks like it's just been cut and pasted. And similarly, we know that if gardens are too small, families are forced to move on rather than extend or adapt their homes. So we know they're important requirements, but we also know that those percentages, maybe they were arbitrary, and also they limit flexibility. So what we've done in this instance is we removed those percentage requirements, but kept the requirements in general so they can be applied flexibly. So this is the last slide, just to sort of wrap it all up. Everything I've talked about is expanded in a huge amount more detail in the appendices A, B, and C, which is the record of comments, the consultation process. The final SPG documents are set out in those appendices D, E, and F, which are they're 3 separate standalone documents. And that's it for me. And apart from to say it's time for questions, and thank you, Chair.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Always an excellent report. I can see the first, Councillor Tyler Lloyd.
I'm particularly interested in what you're saying about large-scale developments of homes that are being enlarged, because I've had a query this week which I've been asked to deal with, which is I am dealing with, but the problem that was brought to me was that somebody living in a road is looking at an application for the next door neighbour, which is doing a massive construction and enlargement. And I understand that people are not wanting to move now, but they're wanting to improve their homes. But people who have come to me with this question says that they've looked at the Swansea City Council guidance, and that they feel that this is not being adhered to. So my question really is the guidance that's put up being adhered to? Because they feel this is out of proportion with what they are dealing with their neighbours in a street, but it's as if it's not going to be part of the street scene. So I think that the reassurance I'm looking for is, you've mentioned that there is guidance there for home improvement. Are you following that guidance, and can they be assured that that guidance will be adhered to? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Des Thomas.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose it's a similar question to what Linda is mentioning. It could be linked. Thank you for the report, Steve. And of course, it refers mainly to new developments, and quite rightly so, that we're planning for the future. And some of the developments which we've recently agreed to are very exciting, I must say, and they're the places where I think people will want to live, which is important, isn't it? Not necessarily have to live, but will want to live. But my question is similar to Linda, I suppose. Existing developments, we need to safeguard the placemaking that is there currently, and it seems to be the increase in people using their existing homes for house makeovers, running businesses from there. I'm dealing with a few that people are actually running businesses from their existing homes, and therefore changing the ambience, the character of the area which they're currently living in. I'm dealing with one currently who's decided to set up his electrical wholesale business, or not wholesale, electrical contractors business on there, with 4 or 5 vans and the storage. He's done a house makeover with something like 15 lights around the outside because he's electrical. He thinks he can do it, and it's lit up like a Christmas tree. There is no, blows out dark sky policy out of the window, but so therefore it's planning enforcement needs to be aware of these new policies, and they need to work closely with them as well. As I say, we need to enforce our current communities as well as the new. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Councillor Downing.
Yes, Chair. Yeah, because environment changes regularly and things, so we need supplementary planning guidance to make these changes as we go along. But my question is, we've got a few in front of us today now, so will they be adopted today, or will they go back to another planning, or have they got to go to council? And when do we refer to them with planning applications that are either coming in or are already being registered with us? Thank you.
We'll come back to that in a minute. It's in the recommendations there as well. Councillor Mike Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hi, Steve. At this point in time, there is a national campaign by some focused on house insulation to be improved nationally. I didn't hear anything in your presentation addressing this. And also you touched on larger windows. Wouldn't this affect the efficiency of the thermal insulation of new houses? I'd be interested in your comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to quickly answer Councillor Downing's query, Planning Committee has the delegated authority to adopt the supplementary planning guidances. That was delegated from full council, I think about 6 years ago. So it is the committee today can adopt them. It doesn't need to go up to full council. Thank you very much.
Okay, cheers. No other hands up here. Stephen. Sorry, who's that? Oh, Councillor Lewis, yeah?
Yes, Chairman. I'm surprised at what Stephen Smith has said, because for years now, the plans in Gower, they've been using small windows, like little prison windows. They've got a great scene outside, and all they can see is a small window. I mean, I always felt that the plans for Gower was like turning it back 2 centuries. And to me, I've always liked big windows. I think that's the way it is. And certainly in my house, I got very large windows. And these days, most of the houses, they're going for all these new windows, which are very effective. It turns the inside outside. I think it's nice. I'm amazed to see the change of heart from Mr. Smith.
There's specific guidance for Gower, isn't there? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Steve, did you want to come back to a few things there?
Okay, yes, thank you, Chair. I've been making some notes there. Councillor Tyler Lloyd, the scale of extensions, obviously we can't talk about specific cases, but there is obviously the householder design guidance sets out criteria for if you're extending a detached house, a semi-detached house, or a terraced house. We've, rules, not rules, sorry, some clarity on the scale of an extension relative to the existing property, as to at what point it becomes too big and overly dominant, and also criteria for consideration of neighbour amenity. So there's everything in the guide to allow extensions to be fully assessed by case officers, and has been since 2014. As I mentioned, these guides have been used effectively since that period, and they've only been refreshed, not fundamentally rewritten. So it's very much for the case officer. I don't know the application you're talking about, if it's a live planning application, if it's a pre-application. I don't know the status, and we haven't got the kind of scope to get into that now, but very much for the case officer to apply the guidance, bearing in mind it is guidance, and they have to make sure that they're applying it appropriately. So there should be everything they need there to assess that scheme. And if the neighbours feel that it's not being fully assessed, they can use the guidance to explain how they think it should be applied and put that case to the case officer. So that's all I can say, is everything's there in the householder design guide. Councillor Des Thomas, obviously, yeah, I completely agree. We have got some exciting new developments coming through. Fantastic to see those built out, and they'll be built out in phases so we can learn from those as they go. And I completely agree, we need to look at our existing places, our existing communities as well. Obviously, in terms of heritage, we have designated conservation areas, and they're looked after via the preserve or enhance test, but the majority of Swansea isn't covered by that conservation area designation. So yeah, and it's just being mindful that some of these house makers, makeovers, as I referred to, a lot of that can typically be permitted development right? So it's knowing what falls under planning control or not. And the guidance seeks to help in that regard. But some of our communities are more consistent in terms of the character, and some of our communities are very varied. And it's just recognizing what kind of community a project may be in, and therefore the degree if it could fit in or be different. We're not looking to sort of be draconian in that way. Councillor Downing, obviously we've had the legal clarification there that this planning committee today can approve the updated SPGs. When will they be referred to? Assuming these SPGs are approved today, they will be used for decisions from next week onward in terms of delegated decisions, and any further planning applications that come before planning committee will refer to these updated supplementary planning guides. And the time that they're referred to would be via the specialist comments, such as myself commenting on a planning application or a pre-application, and then that will be clearly referenced in the planning officer's report, the relationship, the conformity, or otherwise with the guidance in the planning committee report. So you should be able to find reference to these design guides in all the planning committee reports, and it's definitely something to focus on. Councillor Mike Lewis, who asked about house insulation. Often the house installation projects are permitted development rights. We have some of the I think highest levels of solid wall housing stock, certainly in the UK, in Wales. So there will be an increasing programme to upgrade these properties, whether they're private projects or council community projects. And you also referenced larger windows, as did Councillor Richard Lewis. But in terms of larger windows and energy conservation, taking a whole building approach, you might have larger windows on one side, smaller windows on the other. You might have increased insulation in the walls. We are seeing this coming through in projects. We're not necessarily talking full picture windows, but larger than maybe some of the current project windows. And Councillor Richard Lewis, as I think somebody noted, there is on this agenda separate updated guidance for the Gower AONB, which continues the approach of the three design philosophies, one of traditional, one of what's called contemporary vernacular, and one of modern. So it's very much about getting the design rights. It's definitely not about precluding larger windows where appropriate. So I think that's everything.
I think it was. Councillor Thomas, put your hand up again.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just one thing I forgot to mention is the growth in Airbnbs have a danger of changing the placemaking concept. Have there any thought been given to whether these should be licensed or restricted to certain areas? Or?
Yeah. Did you want to answer that, Steve?
Sure, if I could just come in there. Airbnb is a growing issue in planning circles. Welsh Government are currently looking into the legislative position, and maybe there may be a change in planning legislation to control them. We need to see what comes out of the Welsh Government. At the moment, most cases, there's no change of use involved. It's still a dwelling, just occupied by different people. So it's something that's very much on the planning agenda. But it's going to be led by Welsh Government, so we'll see what comes out of the government in terms of legislation.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White.
Thank you very much, Chair, for me booking. Steve, just really for you, really question as well. The question under the new guidance that we're looking out for to come in, and what we would want the developers to comply with. Would you see this having an effect on future 106 agreements and contributions?
Yeah.
I think I'll pass that to Tom, but another SPG that's being updated is the planning contributions SPG, which is on the next tranche of work to do. But the open book development viability process is the way that these contributions are assessed in that transparent way, but I'd have to hand that over to Tom.
Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's I think some of these, it's like the Airbnb issue. We have to deal with them in the right with the right set of guidance or with the right policies. We can't. There are some issues that lie outside an SPG like this, which needs to be quite focused on the placemaking aspects. But like Steve says, there is we're very well geared up actually in Swansea in terms of having SPG in relation to planning obligations, but we also have a really good hold on the viability side of things, and through our planning delivery work, where we have increased understanding of what is financially viable to bring forward, both in terms of what makes a scheme ultimately developable, and what set of contributions, how far we can push those contributions before the scheme sort of falls over then in financial terms. As I say, we've built up an increased understanding of that in recent years, and through our use of models and just working closely with developers. But suffice to say, on a case-by-case basis, on each application, we'll be pushing to the limit on what is achievable in terms of those contributions and obligations.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Yes. I can't see any other hands up now. Thank you all both for that, and as I said earlier, excellent reports. So we see on page 79 there are 3 recommendations again in front of us, so we can take a vote on.
Councillor Cyril Anderson.
For.
Peter Black.
For.
Will Downlin.
For.
Will Evans.
For.
Jones left. Mike Lewis.
For.
Richard Lewis.
Abstaining, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Des Thomas.
For.
Linda Tyler Lloyd.
For.
Mike White.
For.
And Paul Lloyd.
For.
9 for, one abstention.
Yeah, that's carried then. Thank you very much. And then we move on to item 8, and you find on page 95 there is the adoption of the supplementary planning guidance, placemaking guidance for Gower EUND. And is Tom you again?
Yeah, back to me on this one. Chair. Okay. Slides up, okay?
Yes, thanks.
Good. So this follows quite nicely really from the placemaking guidance for residential development more generally. This is the focused specifically on the Gower, and also, as is made clear throughout the document, areas adjoining the Gower where relevant, because we know that some applications, whilst outside the designated area, can still have an impact, and we need to apply the guidance to those sorts of developments. So, Gower is such a special and unique part of the county with its designated landscape that we've long felt that it requires this guidance over and above the more generic placemaking guidance for residential development, and of course it's about much more than residential. There are modules covering development associated with agriculture, the commercial and tourism aspects, and the tourism side increasingly important, and we have got some individual sub-modules relating to things like the nature of the landscape and green infrastructure, and as has already been mentioned, some aspects on lighting, which can be more significant in such a rural area as this. So it was actually back in 2020. Members may well remember that the draft version was presented for consideration for consultation, and that was approved at that time to go out and talk about a revised version of what has been an SPG in place for quite some time, actually, in terms of the design guide for the AONB. That was adopted back in 2011, and hopefully members will agree it's been a successful tool in decision making for many developments over that time. It's been an important one to update, though, and to take account of the big changes that have been made in terms of the national context, which we've already talked about in other reports, and also just to bring in the thoughts of consultees, of stakeholders, and how the document needs to potentially need to be modified, and to showcase some of the development that's actually happened in the intervening years since the design guide was initially adopted. It's been great, actually, and hopefully you've seen that from having a look at the SPG itself, how many images have been used of really exciting schemes that have come forward and have enhanced the landscape, which of course all of this development should do. There's also a reference there to 2 new modules. We talked about the lighting aspects, but also there's one on chalet development, very unique to the Gower. Some of these chalet developments, fascinating history behind those, and very distinctive places within the Gower. So what that is, again, that has had some chalet developments have benefited from SPGs. Some of them have over the years, but to be perfectly honest, they've been outdated for quite some time, and this has been an opportunity to bring that guidance into one document. It's a one-stop shop, really, in terms of anyone who's thinking of doing development in Gower. It's all under this this one document now. So, and also, obviously, in doing so, provides us an opportunity to look at what has happened in these chalet developments in intervening time, and to make sure we've got the most up-to-date guidance to deal with today's sort of pressures on those distinct places. In regard to the consultation on this document, it's actually had 2 periods of engagement and consultation exercises. The first, when it was presented to committee last year, we went out September, October, garnered those views at the time, and made some changes to the document, which we thought necessitated another consultation. It was reasonable and proportionate to do that, given the nature of some of the changes that were made. We needed to give people another opportunity to look at those changes that we had made, to get comments on that, and that judgment was made, and at the time, and it was right. I think that we did do a second consultation, and it also provided us the opportunity to bring it up to date with some of the very latest changes in the national context. So the consultation report that's available, that's linked to the this committee report, they are available online, and you'll see that the details of both exercises are set out in that. just to whiz through really just on some of the the report itself before you sets out some of the detail of the changes, but in terms of slides to summarise those, in terms of the residential module, that's it's been great to be able to update that with some of the fine examples that we've had come forward in recent years, to refer to explicitly to some of the LDP allocations in the Gower and Gower fringe areas where we've already seen development coming forward, but some of them are yet to be approved, and certainly the guidance will be used in relation to those, and again to bring it up to date with the latest policy position in respect of things like replacement dwellings and rural enterprise dwellings. I've mentioned the chalet module. As I say, it replaces a number of them, which well, I did mention they were pretty old, and yeah, we're talking back to the 80s for some of those, so much needed to refresh them. But we, as I say, the development pressure doesn't go away in these locations, and there is often proposals that come forward at a pre-app stage or direct to applications where people are looking to do all sorts of things with some of these chalets, and that they're so unique and so characterful that we will need to be equipped with the right sort of nuanced guidance then that deals specifically with the special character of these and makes clear what can and can't be done to enhance existing or to fully replace these chalets. The module in relation to sort of biodiversity, ecology matters, which was in the previous design guide for Gower, that's been recast really as one relating to green infrastructure and biodiversity as well as the landscape. So it now fully aligns with everything that's been coming forward in terms of the legislation, but also our own planning guidance on biodiversity. We're going to hear about trees and hedgerows one in a moment to align with that. And again, just give it that unique nuance really as to why parts of Gower are special in that way, and what are the sorts of things that developers need to be looking for in terms of meeting those requirements. Again, we mentioned about the lighting. It's been an excellent opportunity to bring that into the one document rather than the separate one that we did have, and really to bring it up to date with what the council's doing in terms of our dark skies community bid, and hopefully having that status, and just to provide some, it's all about providing that guidance to developers to say, well, this issue is there. What can you do to be able to accord with it? It doesn't mean you can't develop in Gower. It just means, well, what sort of things have you got to have regard to? How can you mitigate for some of these impacts? What is the sorts of measures that are out there to ensure that the impact is minimised? And there are all sorts of ways you can do that. So the guidance is very useful in that regard. So that's it from me on this particular SPG. And of course, happy to take any questions there are on this one.
Okay, thank you, Paul, again for that report. It's echoing somewhere. Any member wish to ask a question or comment? Member for Gower's here, Councillor Lewis.
No.
No? Okay, thank you. No? Okay, thank you all very much. Well, unless anyone else wants to raise his hand, we see the recommendations there are 3 again in front of us, and we take a vote on that now again. Are you ready, guys?
Yeah, Councillor Cyril Anderson.
4.
Peter Black.
4.
Phil Downing.
4.
Will Evans.
4.
Mike Lewis.
Or
Richard Lewis,
Abstaining, Chairman.
Des Thomas,
Or
Linda Tyler Lloyd,
Four.
Mike White,
4.
and Paul White.
Yeah, 4.
That's 9-4-1 against. Chair.
Abstain, yeah. Okay, then. Last item then is on page 107. Again, is the adoption of an SPG on trees, hedgerows and woodland. And is Rachel with us and Alan?
Hello, Chair.
Oh, there you are, thank you.
Yeah, Alan isn't on the call at the moment, but we can dial him in if we need him.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll try to share my screen now. Got the graveyard slot, so I'll try and make sure I'm not too long. And I think a lot of it's already been covered, and that you understand the consultation process and the purpose.
they keep the best till last, Amy.
Yeah, definitely. So this one is a guidance note that we did have a version adopted against the UDP back in 2016. So the purpose of this update was to make sure we had something that supported the LDP policy. So the key policy for this one is policy ER11. And of course, we then had the opportunity, as with the others, to reflect placemaking and future Wales and update the PPW. So just a couple of things to be aware of for this SPG. It relates to all trees, not just those protected by TPOs or ancient and veteran trees. So we're looking at every tree that may be affected by development. The other thing that we've done, because we've adopted the biodiversity SPG, I don't know if you recall, that now clearly shows the stepwise process to the mitigation hierarchy. So this SPG now does the same. It goes in that kind of avoid, design, mitigate, compensate process. So it's really nice to have the two aligned so it follows the same process. So yes, the consultation process that we've gone through is the same as that for the AOMB. We went out back, we came to you in July for the draft. We went out in September, October 2020. And similar to AOMB, there were a couple of changes that were significant enough for us to go to further consultation. So the draft before you has got the final amendments as a result of both consultations. And same as before, if you want to see the comments, they're in Appendix A and B of the committee report. So just to whiz through, the best way to understand the content of this is to follow that stepwise process. So the first thing, and this was raised by some of the consultees, so we've made sure it's really clear. It's not an SPG about how to replace trees and how to put trees when you're on site when you've lost them. So actually, if you go straight back to our policy ER11, it says that development that would adversely affect trees will not normally be permitted, and that's where we start in every application. So we're looking to make sure that development could have gone somewhere different in the first place. If it's going on the site, do we understand what we've got on that site, and are we making sure that we're retaining as much as possible? So avoid in the first instance, and then this is where the technical parts of the SPG come in, because whilst policy ER11 says adversely affect, there isn't anything in the plan that particularly helps you understand what an adverse effect is. So the SPG clearly states, with the help of Alan and his more technical understanding of tree surveys and British standards, that we expect a planning application, and this is important as well, if the site contains a tree or is adjacent to a tree which would be affected by the development, we will be looking for a tree survey to British standard. So, and then there's a bit more information in the updated versions to help more of a lay reader to understand what British standard is and how to understand the categories that are in it. So there's a new appendix there now in the back of the SPG, which is a bit more of a day-to-day guide as to what that means. So when you get your planning applications in and your planning reports, you can now clearly, confidently expect to see this information. So this is just happens to be Garden Village. So we're looking at making sure that what's there, this is a really good example. It's got hedgerow, probably got hedgerows around throughout the site, got existing significant trees that form boundaries. So you want to see, before you start your planning application, before we even look at what development goes there, what have we already got? So designing around the assets, which is exactly the same as the approach we've embedded into our biodiversity SPG. So we want to be seeing a survey that says what category A, B and C trees are and where they are. Development should be built around that, which leads into the next steps. So exactly like the placemaking approach that Steve's put into the placemaking guidance and the AUMB guidance. We're looking at design to make places based on the information that we've already got. So once you've got that tree survey in, you need to be having the conversations that we have, especially on these larger sites, to make that place to be designed around the constraints you've got. So for us, there will always likely on a large site like this be bits, well, especially in Garden Village, where we've avoided, so there's no development in those areas. There's other bits where we've retained trees to make sure that the development fits around the trees and hedgerows we've already got. And then there will always be parts of the site where we're looking to put new trees in as part of the placemaking. So really, the more we've got involved in the strategic sites, the more we've understood this kind of layered approach to making sure trees are involved at every stage of the design process. So key thing that the SPG does in terms of retention, it clearly states that we want to, where the tree survey shows we've got category A trees or category B trees, the high or moderate ones, we want these to be integrated into the design. We don't want to be seeing the proposals that showing that these need to be removed. Category C, really these should be retained, but sometimes the quality of them was such, or they're dangerous, that we think there's a good justification for them to not be included in the design. We've also taken the opportunity to look at clearly saying in the SPG how we're going to use planning mechanisms to make sure these retained trees are protected right the way through the process. So that includes the construction phase, root protection areas, fencing, that kind of thing, and conditions for making sure the tree is healthy after the development and how we retain them without them having later applications for them to be removed. So just a little note on placemaking. Something that members asked for when we first came to you back in July 2020 was to consider including in the SPG the remit to be able to use TPOs where we're putting trees into a scheme for placemaking purposes. So I think a good example again on the Garden Village, some of these trees are trees in the highway, so they'll be adopted, and so the council's got control over those. Other trees will be trees in open space, and again that'll be adopted, and we can control what happens to those in the future. But of course, the more we engage in placemaking with developers, the more we are understanding that the sense of place of a street are these trees, which may well, due to the width of a road and everything, have to go into front gardens. And so we need to be able to have the control over those to make sure that these placemaking and the health and well-being and all the various things that benefits we get from trees, we can secure those over the long term. So Para 513 now says the LPA may serve a TPO on these type of trees, which is gives us quite an extra strong way to secure everything that Steve is trying to achieve in his placemaking SPGs. So just a quick, this is one of the key things that we've changed since you last saw the document back in 2020. We had a comment from a consultee saying that it would be good to understand how the council are going to approach tree replacement. So at the moment, the POSI R11 does say that a tree replacement scheme must be agreed prior to the commencement of development, and then it's got to be compliant with British standard. But we didn't really explain how we were going to do that. So we have put a tree replacement standard in, and I'll explain that a little bit in a minute. And that is to make sure in the first instance that we get any trees that are exceptionally where we have to lose a tree, get them replaced on the site. So again, that's integration into the design of the scheme. And even more exceptionally, if they've got to go off-site, then we'll be looking at some financial contributions through 106, and we'll be using those contributions to go to the council for them to plant trees on council-owned lands that's likely to go through the landscaping team. And this is another point that's made a lot clearer in the final version. Some consultees said that it was needed to be clear that it's only category A and B trees that are felled as part of a major development where we will be looking for this replacement tree, the TRS scheme. And also we had comments about making sure that it was clear what we were going to do in the case of a woodland. We do have some strategic sites where the woodland will be affected. So if you woodland needs to be removed, then it will just be looking at the tree survey where the A and B trees are, and we'll apply it to that. So, but obviously a woodland has got wider functions than just the amenity of specific trees. So it'll still be part of the wider process that we go through to look at loss of biodiversity. And we also had comments from GGAT, the Archaeological Trust, saying we also need to make sure that our process to looking at the impact on trees also looks at cultural heritage and where it may be as part of a historic park or landscape or something like that. So this is the big thing that you need to understand that will be coming across in planning applications after this, if this SPG is adopted. Okay, so we now have a tree replacement standard. It gives the council and the applicant a really clear method of understanding how we're going to negotiate for the replacement trees that will need to be provided on or off a site. So again, this feeds into what Tom was talking about with the development viability modelling. The more costs we've got up front, the more we can try and work out what the impact of our requirements are, rather than them coming out through conditions later in the process. So just to re-emphasise, it only applies to category A or B trees, a loss as a result of development. So it doesn't count. We're not talking about schemes where trees are lost as any other kind of schemes that are not subject to a planning permission. Again, within or adjacent to the site, it doesn't apply to C or U trees or trees located in privately owned gardens. And partly this is because I think if we did go that far, I think we'd find that we didn't have the resource to police it or manage the system, because we could be looking at down to every single last small tree. So, okay, so this is how it works. There's a figure in the appendix of the SPG. Again, consultee comments were that we didn't want to be just saying we've lost one tree, we put one tree back. We need to understand what the contribution of that tree is in terms of biodiversity and canopy cover. And so the idea is that you measure the trunk diameter of any category A or B trees on your site. And so for each tree, so if you've got a smaller tree, you probably replace it with one. But the larger trees have obviously got more functionality and more benefit. So we've got a large tree, we will be asking for 6 replacement trees. So they would, in the first instance, we'd be looking for them to be integrated into the design. If it's demonstrated that that is not possible, then we will be looking for a financial contribution. And the standard clearly sets out the amount that we think is reasonable to request for planting of those trees. It reflects the fact there's different costs for trees in open ground, because there won't be a tree pit, or trees with hard standing where it's more of a technical process to construct it with a tree pit. So we're looking at one replacement tree for just under £2,000, and then there's a reduction to take account of the fact that costs reduce at scale, and the same on this side as well. There's a little worked example in the back of the appendix to show how that works. So say, for example, you've got 2 council-owned trees in hard standing on a site, and you measure the diameters, and then so that says you need 2 trees for the 27 centimetre trunk, 3 for the 33. So in total we need 5 replacement trees, and then you add up, because they're both hard standing and there's no open space, that's 5 times 3,000. Oh, sorry, clicked too soon. To give you the total amount that would be the subject of the financial contribution, obviously subject to discussions as part of the viability modelling. So in terms of what you can expect to be submitted with a planning application, once adopted, planning office can ask for the TRS calculations to be submitted as part of, it depends on the scale of the application, of course, could be part of the DAS or the landscaping scheme or the green infrastructure strategy. So we would expect to be seeing how they've gone through the slides I just showed you, how they've arrived at the calculations for the number of trees required, exactly where they're going to be integrated on this tree on the site, and then if it's off-site, we want a justification as to why and where they're going to be put. And this is quite important. Alan has stressed throughout that when we're looking at replacement trees, they need to be large growing species, and so they need to be landscaping and tree officer need to be involved to choose the right species, and that's all about getting the mix and diversity to sustain health and biodiversity over the long term. So that's all from me. Thank you, Chair. Happy for any questions.
Thank you very much. And almost a thorough report again. I got first Councillor Des Thomas, then Councillor Darwin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel. I apologise for getting your name wrong initially. Very important report, very interesting. More important now, I suppose, than ever with climate change and so on. When we generally think of trees and tree preservation orders, we usually think of mature trees, don't we? Something that's of benefit to the community. But I think as the report covers, it's very important that all the new trees in the new developments are extremely important and they need to be preserved. So it's good to see that element within the report. I think we should all be planting trees ourselves. You know, if we got a spot in the garden, plant a tree, but it needs to be an appropriate tree, obviously. Some of the trees alongside highways, whilst they need to be large trees, we also need to take cognizance of the effects of the roots, because, you know, in a few years' time, we don't want people tripping over roots that are protruding through pavements and so on. So, you know, it's good to see such a good report on such an important topic. So thank you very much. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Indeed, yes, indeed. Thank you. Councillor Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, I apologise if I've missed this because you were breaking up on my laptop. On a development, say for argument's sake, that there's 20 trees. Do we put TPOs on them if the developer decides to manage the streets themselves? If we adopt them, there's no problem. But they can put in a self-management scheme where they look after the roads. So do would we then adopt those 20 trees? Oh, sorry, put TPOs on the 20 trees.
Yes. I can't see any other hands. No, so Rachel, if you could answer, please.
Okay, Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly on the larger schemes, we are trying really hard to make sure that we adopt the majority of the roads, so we do have control of the public areas. So there aren't going to be many strategic sites come forward where we wouldn't have adoption. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Rachel. This is what we make clear to developers, is that, you know, it's our clear preference for, of course, we can never force that agenda and force that the roads be adopted, but it's to be honest, it's usually the preference of the developer themselves, and it's certainly ours. And as part of that, we've been working cross-departmentally on this, not just through the planning service, obviously with highways, with our parks departments, as to understand that these streets are going to look different, and we need to have control over them and maintain them where appropriate, have contributions towards our own budgets to be able to look after them. But to answer the query in terms of what happens if it is private, one thing that the guidance does flag up is that there is that mechanism there, and we can, through the planning system and through other regulation, then put TPOs on newly planted trees on within private ownership if we consider that to be appropriate, given the nature of the scheme that we're consenting. But for the most part, it'll be in the public area, but there is a mechanism to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Evans.
You're on mute there, Councillor.
Unmute yourself, well.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Just one quick one. In relation to an interesting point you raised, where we may think of putting the tree on an avenue of trees in the street, for instance, in the front gardens of these properties. Has there been any resistance from the developer on that? Because obviously you know, not everybody wants a tree in their garden, and for selling purposes, I don't suppose it'll, you know, it could affect it. So has there been any feedback from the developers on that very point?
Though we did have feedback from one of our strategic site developers. I think they were only looking at some of the details, and it was more to do with how we would apply the TPO, at what stage, would it be on the whole development at the point of discharge conditions, or it was more technical than that. It wasn't an outright objection to the placing of TPOs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other hands up to speak? No, can't see any. Okay then, you see the 3 recommendations there on page 107. So we will take the vote on those 3 recommendations now.
Cyril Anderson.
4.
Peter Black.
4.
Phil Downing.
4.
Will Evans.
4.
Mike Lewis.
4.
Richard Lewis.
4, Chairman.
Thank you.
Des Thomas.
4.
Linda Taylor Lloyd.
4.
Mike White.
4.
And Paul Lloyd.
Yeah, 4.
That's 10, 4, 10.
Yeah.
So unanimous.
Carried unanimously. And thank you very much. And, excellent meeting. Thank you very much for your reports, everyone, and the contributions from members. And we will see you again. When was it? It's Tuesday. On the 2nd of November. It's not far away. Thank you very much.